Israel has killed much of Hezbollah's leadership. Now it says it's carrying out a ground operation inside Lebanon. The military says the offensive will be limited and localized, but air raids in the past week have killed hundreds of civilians. How can Israel root out Hezbollah? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Israel says its army has launched a ground operation in southern Lebanon to target Hezbollah. It's the latest escalation after more than a week of airstrikes across the country, which have killed hundreds of Lebanese civilians and the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. It comes as Israeli allies, including U.S. President Joe Biden, urge it to agree to a ceasefire with Hezbollah. But Washington's position is anything but clear. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has voiced support for the Israeli military's goals in Lebanon. So what is America's strategy in the Middle East? Does it want to push Israel towards a diplomatic solution or help it to weaken Hezbollah? We'll discuss all this with our panel of guests in a moment, but first, this report from Ferdi Akar.
Flares lit up the skies early on Tuesday, signaling the beginning of Israel's ground operation into southern Lebanon. For days, troops have been mobilizing at the border, about 41,000 soldiers, artillery and tanks, supported by drones and fighter jets. The military says it's targeting Hezbollah sites in a limited, localized raid after a week of intense airstrikes and attacks on Hezbollah leadership.
They're confident because of recent successes in various assassinations and bombings that they have conducted. But frankly, I think they are overconfident. If they go in and they think that they can seriously disable Hezbollah on the ground, I think they're in for a few nasty surprises.
The last time Israeli troops crossed into Lebanon was in 2006. That conflict killed more than 1,100 Lebanese civilians and 158 Israelis, most of whom were soldiers. It ended with a UN Security Council resolution, which barred Hezbollah from operating between the Litani River and the Blue Line, the unofficial border with Israel. Israel was meant to remove all of its troops from Lebanese territory. However, neither side has ever fully complied with the terms. Shortly before the cross-border raids began, U.S. President Joe Biden urged Israel to agree to a ceasefire.
Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plan?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now. Thank you.
Despite that, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the U.S. agrees with Israel's objective to dismantle attack infrastructure along the border to ensure Hezbollah can conduct October 7-style attacks in northern Israel.
Netanyahu has succeeded once again in dragging the United States to its side. The US is even sending assets in order to deter Iran. Now, I think what that does is it only encourages Netanyahu to further increase the escalation.
Last month, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expanded the goals for Israel's war on Gaza to include the return of 60,000 residents to northern Israel. His government is determined that the only solution is a military one.
They are a political burden on this government's shoulders. So this government must redeem itself in the eyes of these citizens. And in fact, this incursion is, I think, more than anything meant to make them feel good, to make them feel secure, so they will return home independently and resolve the government's problems.
Hundreds of Lebanese civilians have already been killed. And after nearly a year of war in Gaza, Israel's strongest ally, the United States, appears increasingly unable to stop it from expanding the conflict. Ferdi Akar, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. From New York City, we're joined by Michael Wahid Hanna, the U.S. Program Director at the International Crisis Group. He leads the organization's advocacy on U.S. foreign policy and conflicts. In West Jerusalem is Ilan Baruch, the chairperson of Policy Working Group, an Israeli advocacy team focusing on policy issues based on the two-state solution. And in London is Andreas Krieg, an associate professor at the School of Security Studies at King's College London. A warm welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Andreas, let me start with you today. So Israel says that its army has launched a ground operation in southern Lebanon and that this operation will be limited, will be localized, will be targeted. But we've seen attacks all over Lebanon. What is Israel trying to achieve in Lebanon? Is there a strategy here?
No, I mean, the simple answer is no. Israel has not had a strategy for 12 months, not for the conflict in Palestine and in Gaza, and also not for the conflict in Lebanon. And obviously the two are interconnected. What happens in Gaza had a direct impact on southern Lebanon. The key, what Israel is saying now is that they're trying to go in with a limited operation. Nothing about it is limited. It's actually, fairly extensive. More people have been killed in Lebanon now than they were in 2006, and we're only not even 2 weeks into the conflict. So it's an all-out war now. And even if what Israel wants to achieve is kind of pushing Hezbollah back to the Litani River, that is not something that is sustainable unless Israel stays there or someone else moves in to kind of keep that area clear of Hezbollah. So the question is really, with the conflict in Gaza as well, what's the strategic end game that Israel is after? And that's kind of the key question. Mr. Netanyahu has been somewhat Mr. Mission Creep, if you will. I mean, what he's been looking at for the most part, rather than coming up with a clear strategy, is kind of stringing up random tactical and operational sort of effects in trying to achieve strategy, but that's not how it works. There is no vision of how Israel can receive and can deliver long-term stability and security for its people, and that's kind of the key question. If it's all about dismantling Hezbollah's capability to strike, then obviously it can be eroded, it can be degraded. A lot of it happened already over the last 10 days. The question is just what will come after, how that in itself can't be just another strategy of mowing the lawn, as what we've seen for years happening in Gaza, where you go in, you degrade, then you move out again, you let your enemy, in this case Hezbollah, regroup and rearm, and then fight another day in a couple of years' time. That can't be, that's not a strategy, that's basically managing conflict. And that's the big question mark, is going in with massive cost for what end?
And Andreas, if we're talking about big question marks that are looming here, if I could just drill down a little bit deeper into what you're saying. I mean, Israel has continued to say not only that they want to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities, but they've also said that they actually want to root out Hezbollah. Is that a scenario that's actually possible? I mean, from your perspective, what kinds of scenarios could we see going forward?
Absolutely not. I mean, the issue of Hezbollah in Lebanon is a Lebanese issue. It's a socio-political one. It's not one that definitely Israel shouldn't solve. It's not one that external actors should solve. And it's certainly not something you can solve militarily. And that's the key issue. Every time Israel has gone into Lebanon, it made matters worse in 1982, in 2006, and likely going to happen today as well. The idea of resistance, which is the same kind of narrative that we hear in Gaza, is one that cannot be rooted out militarily. It requires socio-political solutions, and Israel is not interested in providing them. And the root cause of all of this, it remains the issue in Palestine, remains the issue of the Oslo, the Oslo process, the issue of Palestinian statehood, of the right of Palestinians for self-determination. If that is being addressed, that's something Israel can do. It can solve a lot of these issues of mobilization, radicalization across the region, both in Gaza, but also obviously in Hezbollah and that in Lebanon. And that's something that Israel is unwilling to do.
Ilan, as a former diplomat, let me ask you, what do you think about this current escalation that's being carried out by Israel? And to the point that Andreas was making there when it comes to the question that everybody's asking as to whether or not Israel actually has a strategy or an end game here, do you believe that Israel has a strategy, has an end game here, and one that they could actually carry out?
Yes, I have two remarks on that. First of all, we should not forget the fact that Hamas and Hezbollah attacked Israel first and brutalized Israel, was trying to humiliate us. And in a society that is highly sensitive and with a tendency to become more and more nationalist, the brutality of October and then from Gaza and then from Lebanon gave the government a free hand to operate militarily on both sides. I do not condone this, and I do not represent my government, but I think that in any conversation, the context must put in place and be considered. Now, I think that I'm afraid that for Netanyahu, for his political ends domestically in Israel itself, continuation and, let's say, restricted escalation of the military operations in Lebanon serves him right. It can give him some time before he needs to move on his domestic issues. Very unfortunately, Nasrallah played into the hands of Netanyahu by running an offensive policy towards Israel, motivated, so to speak, by solidarity with Hamas, maybe more so serving an Iranian build-up of the Ring of Fire. And that has given the government in Israel an opportunity to go for a military operation. My fear is that, like in the past, Israel will be successful in moving into Lebanon and dismally unsuccessful when it comes to getting the military out. And the UN Security Council Resolution 7001 was sort of a very thin screen that allowed Israel a level of coexistence with a potentially offensive Lebanon. But that was not enough. And I hope the two parties, the two sides, will be smart enough to go for a resolution that will allow stability on the border so that Lebanese and Israeli farmers and citizens can go back and reestablish their life.
Michael, let's broaden this out a little bit here. All of this is happening when there are Israeli allies, including U.S. President Joe Biden, that are urging Israel to agree to a ceasefire with Hezbollah. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about the position of the U.S., because it's really unclear what exactly Washington wants. On the one hand, you have Biden continuing to say that he wants to see a ceasefire. But then you have, the language that's come out of the Pentagon. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, he's voiced support for the Israeli military's goals in Lebanon. What does America want right now? Does it want Israel to accept a diplomatic solution, or does it want to help Israel weaken Hezbollah?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've put your finger on something important, and that is that there are a lot of contradictory messages coming from Washington, coming from the Biden administration. The president did mention the idea of a ceasefire, and yet there's really no evidence that there's any diplomatic energy behind that kind of initiative, neither in Gaza, which has been a dead end for months now, or on Israel's northern border in Lebanon. And so at the same time, you've also heard supporting rhetoric and anonymous leaks that suggest optimism about what Israel may be able to accomplish militarily. Now, it's clear that there are a diversity of views within the Biden administration, and they have suggested in the past few days that there has been an agreement on a limited incursion into southern Lebanon. But as we've seen throughout the almost past year of conflict, assurances on the front end have oftentimes not been carried out. And so I think at the same time, there is quite a bit of concern about where this is going, because as your guests have also made clear, there isn't a sense of what the final aims of this military campaign are, how that will be translated into a political outcome, or whether a political outcome is even going to be pursued. So I think there are a lot of unknowns, including how Israel and Hezbollah will fare militarily. I think there is quite a bit of surprise, I think, within the administration at just how successful Israel has been at a tactical level in terms of its ability to degrade Hezbollah, to assassinate Hassan Nasrallah. And so I think there is a bit of caution because some of the worst case scenarios that the administration has been worried about, that they have cautioned the Israelis about, have not come to pass. So there is a kind of permissiveness at the moment, and I think a lot of confidence and perhaps overconfidence on the part of the Israelis.
Andreas, I saw you reacting to what Michael was saying. It looked like you wanted to jump in, so please go ahead.
No, I absolutely agree. I think there is a huge risk here. I mean, everyone is in this. I think, especially in Israel, everyone is absolutely surprised by how quickly and how effective the combination of air power and intelligence has been in degrading the operational strategic leadership of Hezbollah. But I think we must be very careful here to now equate this with what Hezbollah is going to do on the ground. Hezbollah has done nothing else for 18 years to prepare for a ground war. They wanted that ground war. They've prepared the ground for a ground offensive. And operating in this terrain is going to be much more difficult than operating within Gaza, even if it's not in an urban context yet. But there are also tunnel systems. Hezbollah operates like a network. So even if their command and control is degraded, even if a communication has been degraded, these cells operate fairly autonomously, and it won't be an easy it won't be a walk in the park for the Israelis. They know that. And hence we need to be very careful not to embolden the Israelis. And I think that goes to the US administration, not to embolden the Israelis to think out of hubris now that they can go all the way or potentially take this war elsewhere to Syria or potentially even to Iran. I think that would be miscalculation. Iran has been very cautious not to get sucked in. They've been very cautious not to kind of have an all-out war. And it seems like from the messaging, they're not going to get involved with Hezbollah. But there will be a red line. I think if Israel was going to go into Beirut and really root out Hezbollah as a movement, as the integral hub in the axis of resistance, I would think that Iran would do something about that.
Andreas, let me also ask you, I saw you reacting earlier when Elon was talking about the question about, whether or not Israel, once it potentially is more established in Lebanon, if it can get its military out. And I want to ask you about that because I saw you reacting to that. I mean, do you think there is a concern right now that if Israel's military goes in deeper, that they are going to stay there for a longer amount of time?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, this is mission creep, isn't it? Because if there is no strategic end game, the IDF is guided by tactical and operational objectives that will be, one operational objective is achieved and then they're moving into the next one. That's what we've seen in Gaza. They achieve one, then they move to the next one, they move to the next one. But it's basically wandering around in circles. And, one key issue I think that loads of people are forgetting here is that this is the greatest rift in Israeli history between the security sector and the government. In the way is the IDF has publicly come out and said, what is our end game in Gaza? What are we trying to achieve? And the problem is that the IDF has not had any answers yet. And the worry is that you might go around in circles in Lebanon, again, like they did in Gaza, trying to achieve something that can't be achieved, where one objective leads to another, where you're saying we're going up to the Litani River, then we're going up to one river further north, then we might go up into Beirut. I don't think it's going to go that far, but if there is, nobody is stopping Israel right now. And I think that's where the US government needs to come in. We need someone to tell the Israelis where the limits are.
So, Elon, you heard Andreas there talk about the fact that he believes that, the U.S. or some other power needs to be able to stop Israel going forward. And I want to ask you, I mean, is there any room for diplomacy here from your perspective? Does the U.S. at this point actually have the power to stop Israel when it comes to its offensive both in Lebanon and Gaza? And if it's not the U.S., is there any other outside player that could do this?
Israel is conducting its operations in light of two objectives that have nothing to do with the war in Lebanon and have everything to do with Palestine. One is for Netanyahu to reassume his power domestically. I think he's looking at moving the elections, the next elections, to the original date, which is somewhere in the second half of 26. There was a hope in Israel that as a result of the disastrous catastrophe, we will have earlier elections and a removal of Netanyahu. He is adamant that he is the only one that can run the interests of Israel. And the second is his fear that the international community will enclose around him with the two-state solution, moving the Palestinian case forward. And I think for him, a continuation and expansion of the war in Lebanon right now gives him some time to maneuver on both ends, waiting to see what the result is in the United States. If Trump comes in, it's an entirely different story. If Harris takes over the White House, then it will be more difficult for Israel. But until then, he's doing his best to gain time and to use it to push back on any political solution of the day after that will allow the Palestinian Authority to assume position of governance in Gaza and get into an alliance with the international community that will isolate Israel even further. So a war in Lebanon will end in one of two cases. Either there is an external sanction against it by the United States. We don't see it coming now as yet. Or change, a fundamental change of the success story Israel can tell itself now about the war. Or if they are casualties, Israeli casualties, as in all wars in Lebanon, Israel will have to consider leaving. And that is always the critical phase in any conflict in Lebanon, where Israel knows how to move in and is dismally in failure when it comes to leaving Lebanon. And we will have to see how this unfolds.
Michael, when it comes to the U.S., is what we're seeing, is it more that America is unwilling to stop Israel, or is it more that America is unable to stop Israel from expanding these conflicts?
Well, it's been unable using the tools that it has tried to use, exhortation and consultation and public messaging. It hasn't wanted to use the other kinds of tools, the actual real leverage. Obviously, Israel is a sovereign country. It makes its own independent decisions about its national security, but it is uniquely reliant on the United States. Its military is extensively reliant on U.S. Equipment, spare parts, replenishment. These aren't things that can be readily replaced. Now, this also isn't an option that the Biden administration has been willing to employ. I think the political calendar suggests that that's not something that we're going to see in the near term. And I think recent Israeli success militarily also suggests that the Biden administration is not going to be interested in trying to deploy that kind of leverage with Israel in the coming months. And so what we've seen then is the United States being gradually dragged along and acclimatizing itself to shifting Israeli goals. And that's not a comfortable place for an American administration to be, clearly not really in charge of dynamics and reacting to military developments as they come. And of course, U.S. personnel are part of this story. They have been, U.S. personnel have flowed back into the region, partly as an effort to deter Hezbollah and Iran. But that also creates a great sense of security, I think, for Israel, and does create some moral hazard in the sense of providing something of a guarantee in terms of U.S. Defensive action should the regional front really escalate.
Michael, let me also just ask you about something that you've referred to and also Ilan referred to, which is the specter of the U.S. elections that are just coming up in about 5 weeks from now. I mean, how much is that playing into all of this when it comes to perhaps the timing, the fact that Israel would choose now to launch this, what they're calling ground offensive or targeted ground offensive into Lebanon? And also, how much of a problem is this for the Biden administration at this particular moment?
Yeah, I mean, a lame duck presidency is its own unique thing, and I think it's very plausible that the timing of this military campaign and the American political calendar are linked. But regardless, we can say that it does have an inhibiting impact on the freedom of American operation, as we're seeing now. Now, the politics of this in the United States are quite complicated. And of course, for candidate Harris, this is not the sort of thing that she will welcome. It is a headache. There are political costs on either side, as we've seen with the uncommitted movement and dissent from within the Democratic Party. There has been a lot of opposition to the way that the Biden administration has handled the post-October 7th war, particularly with respect to Gaza. And at the same time, there are political costs on the other side. If the Biden administration were to aggressively exercise leverage, that comes with its own costs among pro-Israel supporters in the United States. And so it is a complicated equation. I think for Harris, there is the further specter of Trump trying to exploit this chaos in the world. That this is a function of Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration missteps, and so this isn't the topic that Harris will want to have looming large over the closing weeks of her campaign. It is a distraction, but it's something that the administration is going to have to deal with, and they seem at the moment to be resigned to the fact that this land operation, this invasion of the South, is going to happen. And I think they are hoping for the best, but there hasn't really been a lot of preparation or thought given to what comes next.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Michael Wahid Hanna, Ilan Baruch, and Andreas Krieg. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.